hanging about. So, good morning. Oh, come on. You can do better than that. Good morning. There, you see, you're there. I thought you'd disappeared for a minute. Right, so as you can see, Steve Furnell dropping technology all over the floor on demand and talking about cyber skills and what they look like, apparently. So first of all, just with that slide in mind, how many of you are working in or planning to work or wanting to work in cybersecurity? Good start for an audience at a cybersecurity event. Thank you for that. As you can see here from this data from Enterprise Strategy Group over recent years, there is a bit of a skills shortage, apparently. According to the respondents of the studies they've done, significant proportion are reporting that they've got a problematic shortage of cybersecurity skills in their organisation. You can see in the most recent results, more than half of the organisations are saying that. Not only is it a problem here in the UK, it's actually a global issue for us. So we've got, for example, Ernst & Young's Global Information Security Survey saying that a third of organisations are struggling with skill shortages. So in terms of dealing with their cybersecurity, that places it at the head of the game, ahead of things like budgetary constraints. ISC Squared, who's heard of ISC Squared? Okay, I'll orient you a little bit further as we go. ISC Squared is the International Information Systems Security Certification Consortium, if I remember rightly. I believe I do. And they do certifications such as CISP. Who's heard of CISP? There we are. More of you have heard of CISP than have heard of the organisation that provides it. So they found in their workforce study that two-thirds of organisations, by my maths, are reporting a skills shortage. And more than that, 51%, or moreover, 51% saying that it's putting their organisation at moderate or extreme risk as a result. So they are facing tangible problems. And their study also gives us a nice figure that we can bandy around and quote for the global skills shortage, 4.07 million. So what that tends to suggest is if you're wanting to work in cybersecurity, you ought to be able to find a job opportunity somewhere. So that's sort of good news for all of you that put your hands up. Okay, but to do this and to recognise this issue of skills, well, what are we actually short of? So what I've got here is a sort of rough and ready diagram that tries to sort of give a picture of the landscape of skills and qualifications and how they might be differentiated. Now, it's not to suggest that anything in the diagram is more important than anything else, but there is a difference in terms of the skills and the focus that you might get from, let's say, an academic degree compared to one of the industry or professional certifications, which can be, in some cases, quite specific to a role or even to a product or to a vendor. And so, it's not just a question of, I've got a cybersecurity qualification or cert. What have you actually got and where does it fit in, is the question. So, guess, sort of having looked at security for a while, or if you'll realise already, it's what I've termed here a multi-faith community. It's not just about one particular aspect. It's not all about pen testing. It's not all about forensics. It's not all about risk assessment. It's about all of it, and it all needs to fit together to suit the needs of the organisations we're trying to protect. So there's a mix of technical, as I sort of generalise them, and non-technical topics. And it's not that anything is more important than anything else, but what you tend to see in the way different frameworks and different qualifications and certifications treat things is sometimes more of a skew, perhaps, towards the technical side. Certainly talking to people early on in the careers in cybersecurity, they can be forgiven for thinking this is all about the pen testing, the intrusion detection and all those sort of aspects. Okay, but in reality, there are, of course, the range of things. So just, again, some evidence from an Ipsos Mori study for DCMS about the cyber skills labour market conducted a year and a half or so ago. And they've got a new version of this coming out later this year. The key thing here, not sort of being too concerned about the individual entries, but the fact that we've got managerial and technical dimensions being separated there, and the fact that you've got varying levels of confidence across the respondents about their ability to deal with things in both categories. So just pulling out, for example, penetration testing, less than half of them are confident they've got the skills in their organisation to do that. And similarly, if we look at carrying out a security risk assessment, less than half of them just about saying they're confident there. And both of those things are arguably important to maintaining the security of an environment. Ramming the point home a little bit more, if we think about the skills that In this case, the InfoSec Institute suggested the top 10 skills for security professionals that they need to have. Well, okay, topping the list there, you see some things that look sort of fairly technically oriented, but coming down the list, you get some things that, well, not only are they perhaps not technical, they're not even directly cybersecurity skills. Good Lord, the ability to communicate and collaborate with people, and curiosity and a passion for learning. Hands up, students, if you have a curiosity and a passion for learning. Good. And even some non-students put their hands up. That's really good. You're very curious and passionate. We can talk about that later. Okay. Yet more then. ISC Squared, another study that they did. You remember ISC Squared. We mentioned them just now. Hiring and retaining top cybersecurity talent. 250 professionals that responded. These are the top area or the top skills that they found themselves most commonly using. Now, what you can see from this is it's a different sort of topping the list. It's now things that seem to be the more non-technical perspectives, and perhaps this is affected by the nature of the respondents that were involved. These were senior professionals in management levels, for example, and so perhaps as they've gone on in their careers, these roles and these related skills have become more important. Technical skills, therefore, might dominate at the lower, more entry-level roles in cybersecurity, but to progress onwards, perhaps, you need to have this more holistic skill set. So does that mean non-technical is more important? Is that what I'm trying to say? No, of course not. It's key message here is it's all about all of it, so to speak. But the way that you get to see cybersecurity and what you perceive it to be, how you're taught about it perhaps, very much depends on the view that you've encountered, the views that have been presented to you. And even looking at some of the, if you like, the leading security frameworks that are out there and the way they cut the topic up, the way they divide the cake, you can get a very different impression there. So let's just have a look at some of them. Now, two examples that I'll sort of spell out, and then we'll have a sort of a graphic that shows some split across a wider set. So how many of you have heard of CIBOC? Okay, so not many of you. So to spell it out a little bit more, this, as it says, probably there, is the cybersecurity body of knowledge. It's a relatively recent publication sponsored by the National Cybersecurity Centre here in the UK. It's 854 pages long, if you fancy some bedtime reading. So, yeah, it'll keep you occupied for a few days, I'd imagine. And the key thing about CIBOC is it aims to provide a body of knowledge to inform the security discipline. And in order to do so, they cut the topic into 19 knowledge areas, as are listed there. Okay, now, I'm not making any commentary on the correctness or otherwise of this, perfectly reasonable 19 knowledge areas. But sort of take a mental snapshot of that and compare it with, for example, ISO 27002. Who's heard of that one? Okay, slightly more of you. So this, for those who haven't, is the International Code of Practice for Information Security Controls. 14 clauses, so 14 top-level areas that they identify, and you can see how they've split it up. And it's quite a different split in some cases to the way CIBOC cuts it. Taking it a little bit further, and if we look across a set of different security frameworks, to use a generalised term as reference points, we've got the common body of knowledge from ISC Squared, which underpins their certifications. We've got our own CIISec skills framework, which we use to enable individuals to assess their capabilities and their level of skill. We've got something called CIISec, which is the cybersecurity curricular guidelines developed as a joint initiative between the ACM, the IEEE, the AIS, and IFIP. And if you don't know what those acronyms mean, you can Google them. We've got CIBOC, which I just mentioned, and ISO 27002. We've got the NICE Workforce Framework, the National Initiative on Cybersecurity Education, sponsored by NIST in the US. And we've got the National Security Agency in the US, their cyber Academic Centres of Excellence for Cybersecurity, or I can't remember what the CAE actually stands for. You can Google that too. And what we've also got there is a couple of cuts of job openings mapped against the NICE framework to see where the centres of gravity are. Now, what you can see here, to make it nice and colourful, I've colour-coded it according to whether the top-level categories of topics are non-technically in the main, mixed technical and non-technical, predominantly technical, or even not cybersecurity specific. So you notice in the skills framework, there's one topic, our J skills, which is about leadership, communication, collaboration, etc., which isn't cybersecurity specific, but very much necessary to operate in the profession. Now, across that set, you can see some fairly significant variations in the balance of the top-level areas. Some are significantly more technically oriented, some significantly more non-technically oriented. Just to show a little bit more detail about, referring back to the two we already saw, how the colour coding comes about. This is how I colour-coded their top-level topics. Okay, and if you look at the underlying controls in 27002, or you look at the description of the knowledge areas in CyBOK, you will say, okay, there will be overlaps. There will be some things that what I've coded as the technical things mention things that are not directly technical and vice versa. But on balance, in the main, that's how you might cut those and group them generically. So, which one's the right one? Is there a right one? Well, no, that's not the point. The point is these are different frames of reference, and you can get a different perception about what cybersecurity is and the skills it requires, depending on which one you've looked at, which one you're using as your reference point. So they've all been developed for, well, slightly different purposes. They're trying to do different things, but they're all there saying, here's the security discipline, here's how it breaks down, okay? Now, going back to what the industry actually needs, to quote a couple of employer quotes from studies that I've already mentioned, the ISACA State of Cybersecurity and Symantec study there. Well, I won't read the quotes, but you can see the point there that's being made is it's not just about having technical skills, it's about the ability to take those skills and relate them to the business context. So, being technical is great, but that isn't all you need in order to progress. It's all right. How does that then relate to the qualifications and the certifications we might be experiencing and seeing? So this next bit I thought was interesting. You might disagree. I looked at 10 MSc programs here in the UK, sort of across the piece. So from Russell Group and non-Russell Group universities, taking some that were NCSC certified degrees, some that weren't. The shared characteristic for all of them is their title is simply MSc Cybersecurity. So I've not taken any that are about cybersecurity and forensics or network security. They are all called the same thing. Okay? Some of them have optional pathways, some of them have a fully mandated curricula. So I looked at the main core modules in them. I excluded the project from consideration because that, of course, could be anything you choose. So looking at the main modules, this is how they break down. And it's quite a significant difference here across the piece. I mean, particularly for example, Course 1 and Course 5, where you see no modules that seem to be explicitly about non-technical aspects of security, so risk management and governance and legal aspects and things of that nature. In fact, in Programme 5, what you see is actually half of the content isn't even explicitly about cybersecurity. It's more general software development, computer architectures, computer networking, etc. So somebody taking graduates from each of these courses, because all of the courses are named the same, and expecting these graduates perhaps to have a similar background, would probably be quite surprised, because, again, cybersecurity is different and is presented in different ways. So it's, again, not that any one of those has got it right and others have got it wrong, but you do need to know what you're getting, and you need to look under the hood and see, well, what's the content that the program or the certification offers, and as a student or as somebody taking the certification, is that what I need? And as an employer, is that what I want? Is that what we need to fill our skills gap? So we've got things like the NCSE certified degree programs that give a badge of quality and capability for the organisations delivering them, in terms of what the program is, who's delivering it, how it's assessed. But it still doesn't mean that all of those programs are the same thing in terms of content. In any case, going back to what employers actually want, and looking again at the ISC squared workforce study, well, actually, degrees are right at the bottom of the list. You know, it's not that they don't want them, but it's not the priority thing that the employers and recruiters are necessarily looking for. So nearer the top of the list, after the obligatory experience that everybody would like others to have, you've got cybersecurity certifications. So things like the CISP that I mentioned before. So let's have a look at what that might mean. So we've got, as you may or may not be aware, numerous providers out there of industry professional certifications. You see people with these various letters, postnominals after their name. from various providers. So you've got people like CompTIA with Security Plus, EC Council with CH and other things. ISACA, who I mentioned, which used to be the Information Systems Audit and Control Association, but now I think just call themselves ISACA, ISC Squared and SANS. And they've all got various things, and there are others. So if you know of or represent anyone I've not listed, I do apologise, there was only so much room on the slide. But even there, all of these have got potentially differing focus, different assessment requirements, different prerequisites in terms of experience that you might need in order to hold them. So for example, CEH is the sort of thing that you could embed within undergraduate or master's program delivery and get students to take that as part of or following on from their normal studies. No prerequisites in terms of practitioner experience. CISP, CISM and others, by contrast, require several years of practical experience as well as the ability to pass an assessment in order to gain the certification. So they're not the same thing. And moreover, there's actually lots of them, and this is just a small snapshot from a study that you can find online from Ed Titel and some colleagues. If you Google Titel et al., you'll find a thing about cybersecurity certifications. I'll give a £5 to anyone who can tell me what all of these mean. A £5, yeah, that's a lot for a Cornishman, I say. So, you know, if you thought the Scots had a reputation for money, Cornish are worse. So, anyone? Go. No, not later. I'm not asking you to Google them. I'm now, because otherwise my £5's at risk. So, no. So, imagine that you're looking to try and determine has somebody got the certification we want, and you're confronted with somebody with, let's say, 3 or 4 of these after their name. Do you really know what it means? Even if you then look up the title, you've got to still understand what does that certification actually cover. So it's quite potentially confusing for employers in that context. And to illustrate perhaps the point, here's an example of an advert that I found sort of late last year. And the bit that I thought was interesting here, well, 2 things I thought was interesting. One, there's a salary of 80,000, which I thought was quite fair. Who'd like that salary? Just in the room? Okay, fair few people. Obviously the professors in the room kept their hands down because that's quite small, but you know. What we've got here is an interesting little statement. So CEH, which I certified ethical hacker, which I said, students could get without experience just from studying that topic. CISP requires 5 years experience, 4 years experience. CISM, similarly. GIAC, Global Information Assurance Certification, which is actually a whole series of about 45 different certifications, spanning things from pen testing to risk assessment to incident analysis, or equivalent. So all of those different things, or something equivalent to that. Do they really know what they want for that position? Possibly not, from what they're saying there. So if for them CEH is equivalent to any given GIAC certification or the CISP, possibly that's not very specific or useful. In practice, all things are not equal, as it says. You see far more demand for CISP than you see for the other certifications. Doesn't mean that CISP is the best, although it is a good one in terms of the breadth and the experience prerequisites. So somebody hiring somebody with a CISP will know their experience in something, but actually you won't know what they're experienced in without looking in more detail, because it can be in any 2 or more of the common body of knowledge areas that CISP covers. And then the others, or some of the others, somewhat less demand. Again, not a judgment on their usefulness, but less demand for them out there. And this is sort of evidence here in this sort of thing showing supply and demand from the CIBERSEC website in the US, looking at job vacancies relative to certification holders. So what we see here, for example, is CISP. There's quite a high demand for it, but relatively limited supply. So for every CISP holder, there might be 3 or 4 job openings that they could apply for. Whereas for CompTIA, or for the Security Plus certification, there's more supply than there is demand. Possibly because it's an easier one to get, and also because it's more entry level, perhaps fewer roles are specifically looking for it. A final bit then, looking at a very recent study published by, again, Ipsos Mori for DCMS, looking at the cyber sector itself, the organisations that we've got in the UK and the people working in it, and the perceived barriers for those cyber firms themselves in terms of growing. And what's at the top of the list? Candidates in the labour market, or lack of candidates, having the technical cyber skills that those companies need, so they can't find the people to hire. And then if we go down the list a little bit more, to here, then sort of further down, there are existing employees lacking the technical skills, and then the non-technical skills, lacking in the market and lacking amongst their existing staff. So the skills issue is very much a concern for not only the wider industry, but also the cyber industry itself in trying to push things forward. So some concluding comments then. It's important to recognise that we need a breadth of skills, that cybersecurity isn't just about one thing or another. So if you're sitting there studying the topic and thinking where you want to go, recognise that there are all these different routes available and different progression pathways accordingly. Actual way to recruit is to look at the talent that's out there and what they hold, not to say that that is the source of their expertise, but to signify what somebody has got. But you need to understand what the qualifications and certifications really mean. We certainly don't want to take a siloed approach and put all of our resources into one particular area, because that's going to mean we're going to overlook something. But we need also to get the skills that we've got integrated and working together. But equally, and probably still good news for you lot in terms of actually going out there and finding a role in the industry, skills are still in short supply. So the market is looking for more people to take on. Okay, and just to flag up, this is the cybersecurity sector analysis one. Just for reference, there's a URL, but if you Google that term, you'll find, I keep saying Google, other search engines are available, just rarely used. And here's a paper coming out later this month that is from myself and colleague Matt Bishop at University of California, Davis, in which the little charts and stuff that I showed came from as well. And other than that, and without Rich having to hold up a time up sign, I'm finished and, yeah, all right, stop, he says now. Able to take questions if Rich allows it. Thank you.
Excellent. So yeah, I think you'll agree that's quite eye-opening, especially when you're looking at the degrees and what the different skill sets and things, how they align to the frameworks. So we've got a couple of minutes. Any quick questions for Steve?
Yes. Sorry? Wait for the microphone. There we are.
I dispute the skills gap existing.
Okay, elaborate.
There is an issue with HR and getting the CVs of the appropriate people to the hiring manager, and the understanding of those people for the people that could do the job.
So I think that's actually a good point in the sense. Yep.
Children and 9 to 5.
Okay, so certainly in terms of recognising what could be relevant and what could be useful in cybersecurity, I think there is perhaps a blinkered view still that we're looking for people that, for example, have a computer science background specifically and need to have that sort of qualification that we're showing. And it's not about that. You can have, and there are many current practitioners working in security that have come from very different directions. So business, psychology, law, and other fields entirely that are making a very valued and relevant contribution to it. So it is a question of looking for what skills are we really after. So, for example, the problem solving, the communication skills, the ability to attack an issue, you can get that without having studied IT and computing, for example. And in terms of the 9 to 5 aspect, what was the point you were leading to there? Okay, so also, and again, actually going wider than that, recognising that we need to tap into the talent pool in all its forms. So across the genders, recognising neurodiversity, recognising that the skills are there if we're prepared to look for them, and making it actually accessible for people to join the profession and bring them into the organisation. So some flexibility in that context is certainly relevant. So yeah, I agree with your point about there are probably more skills that we could tap into than necessarily some of these results suggest. But if you look at the totality of some of these surveys, they also, in some cases, do drill into things like gender balance, neurodiversity, and the sort of the wider workforce that they've got. So it's not that they're necessarily overlooking them.
Any other quick questions for Mike? Mike, Steve?
Yeah.
Or Mike.
For Steve via the mic, if you like.
I mean, I think it's really interesting, even with our certified degrees, so our undergrad and postgrad certified degrees by NCSC, which was is now being aligned to the CIBOC framework. These degrees can be quite different, even though they have the same certification. You know, so you can load up on certain parts of the curriculum, certain types of topics, and they'll be given the same kind of general classification as a sort of badge of how well we deliver these things and what the topics are. So I think as students, you know, you have to really look a little bit deeper than even the badge on the degrees or the universities you're going to. I think you have to look into what's in them and what they're actually teaching, and maybe where you want to end up.
Yeah, and the message is not that anything is right or wrong, but you need to understand, as Rich says, what you're getting and where you're trying to get to with it. Okay?
I think that's
Thank you very much.
Thanks very much.